Hey there, property people. Welcome to the Regional Property Show, where we discuss topics designed to educate and inform listeners on how to get the most from their real estate experience in the Ballarat and surrounding areas. My name is Stu Bryan, and I'm a licensed real estate agent and the owner of Stone Real Estate Ballarat. We're part of a large network of offices throughout Australia with a dedicated team servicing the Ballarat and surrounding community. If you would like to contact our office to discuss anything related to residential sales or rentals, you can call us on 5341 2200 during business hours, or just Google Stone Real Estate Ballarat. That's Stone, S-T-O-N-E, Real Estate Ballarat. So in this catch-up with Scott Tennant from Matthew Walsh Electrical, he provides a comprehensive overview of solar energy and discusses the various types of solar systems, their benefits, and the consideration for homeowners. He emphasises the importance of understanding the financial implications of solar installations, the lifespan and the maintenance of solar panels, and the options for government incentives. Now, in this conversation, we also touch on the future of solar energy with battery storage and the impact of solar systems on the real estate values and practicalities of going off-grid. Welcome, Scott Tennant from Matthew Walsh Electrical, who is today going to give us an overview of everything solar. Well, not everything, but give us at least a general overview of things like solar panels and so forth, because as a real estate agent, we get asked about this sort of stuff a lot, whether it's from people looking to purchase or whether it's from people thinking about selling. And I wanted to sit down with someone who's got a lot of experience. And you and I have had conversations about solar in the past. In fact, you came out and did a proposal for our place. And I figured, in the conversations that you and I have had in the past, I got a great deal of help and assistance. So I thought you'd be a terrific bloke to sit down with. So welcome.
Thank you. Good. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So give us or give the listeners and viewers an overview, I guess, of your background and, your connection to, the organisation and the industry that you're working in.
Yeah, so my journey in solar and energy efficiency started all the way back in 2007 with solar hot water, heat pump hot water. Yeah, I was working for a heating and air conditioning company and brought that product range into their portfolio and grew that part of the business. That was up in northeast Victoria when we were living up there. So I'm Ballarat born and bred. Otherwise, proud of it too, despite the weather. Yeah. From there, I took myself back to uni. I got some degrees and did some things like that. Became a certified home sustainability assessor for a program that was around with Solar Victoria at the time. And then I just found a real enjoyment and a challenge in all the different things that came with that energy efficiency side of things. 2022, I partnered up with Matthew Walsh Electrical, and my role predominantly is running the Ballarat Solar Group aspect of the business with solar, battery, and the like. Matthew's journey probably started similar time to mine with getting into solar. He's done a lot of commercial, residential, and had a bit to do with some of the retailers and things like that. So he's had his own brand and his own product range, but he's also done installations for the retailers. And by retailers, I mean the sort of stuff that you see on the TV where they sell something, get a subcontractor in to install. So we've got a bit of a good background in that as well.
Okay. So how long has Matthew Walsh been doing solar now?
I think around about the same time. So about 2007 was when got his accreditations, been doing work on solar, but it was more around fully getting into around that 2007 to 2010 time.
Okay. So let's talk about a little bit of the different types of solar and so forth. So I think there's a lot of confusion out there, but that might just be because of my ignorance around, what it is. Can you talk us through the different types, sizes, designs, and all that sort of stuff as just a general overview to start with?
We predominantly look at solar in two formats. There's the standard sort of solar systems, predominantly you'll see on most homes. And then you have the more fully featured systems, which is probably the main core of our product range, especially in the last 12 or 18 months. You typically find that there's a lot of noise out there, and a lot of the market penetration or market focus is on cheap solar systems. So that's where you see a lot of, and people get a little bit they've probably had an experience with a friend or a relative who put a cheap system on at some point in time, hasn't lasted the journey and failed. Different brands, different products have come and gone over time. Installation regulations have changed. And it's around, really it comes down to, I think, from our perspective, is somebody having an informed and decision-making process and knowing that there is an alternative, because the vast majority of the market will just be focused on selling a cheap price point product.
Scott, I've heard of things like inline and separately, I'm not sure what the terminology is, where it has its own device to manage the power and so forth, and they can be expanded and so forth. Is that something that has a difference in terms of the features and what they do?
It does a little bit. So the most commonly known product would be what's called a string inverter. Okay, you have the panels on the roof, and then you have a control module or inverter, which changes that energy to be able to be used within the home.
Yep.
The system that you and I spoke about back at the time was an alternate to that, which is what we call microinverters, and that's where every single panel has its own microinverter behind it. No single point of failure per se, and you can see exactly what every single panel does in comparison to a string inverter, where they're in as a group together. And you have, both systems will have design criteria that's quite specific, but microinverters typically tend to be a more expandable, growable system as your needs change, which is how I started my solar journey.
And is there a benefit to doing one versus the other?
Depends on the needs or the wants of the client is typically what we find. So for people that want more information, more data, more specifics, knowing exactly what's going on with every element of the system, that are really into detail, they typically tend towards the microinverter systems and what I call a fully featured system. You get more data, more access to information per se than what you might out of a string inverter.
And most of this data comes to a panel on a wall or to your phone, or is it an option to do all of those?
Pretty much nearly every system now is what we call, I guess, a smarter system. Gone are the days where what you might call a dumb inverter, and it just had maybe a screen display and you had to go out to it. Every system now has an app, and you can get all your data and information off there. There's remote access for the installer and also the manufacturer, so you can do a lot of troubleshooting remotely, and maintenance and repairs, not repairs per se, but updates and things can happen more remotely and checking on systems.
Okay. Are there circumstances where you would recommend one versus the other, or is it, as you said, purely down to what the desirability of the purchaser is looking for?
More often it comes down to the consumer and what they want.
Yeah.
The microinverters are traditionally renowned for being more suited to multiple roof lines, shading aspects. So obviously, Buninyong, which we're both very familiar with, lots of treed areas, lots of shading issues. And so, you find a lot of properties, a lot of people won't have gone down the solar path because they go, shading just makes it not viable for a solar system. We've seen a lot of information and data with systems that do have shading aspects and things that contribute to the performance of the system. And in a lot of cases, something is still better than nothing, even though the system may only operate at 60, 70% of a panel that's not in shade at all.
Okay, so if it's an inline system where it doesn't have those microconverters, does that mean that if part of the system is in shade where it's not working, none of it works?
No, it just reduces the overall performance of the group. Yes.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So when should consumers start to consider solar panels for their property, and when shouldn't they? Like, what are the things that I guess people need to toss up? I mean, from your perspective, you're saying everyone should consider it, I guess. But looking at this from a practical perspective, there's going to be a subgroup out there of people that probably is just not going to work for them.
Part of solar is a mindset, and part of solar is a financial investment and that financial component. In the vast majority of instances, solar system just purely makes sense. When you consider that the energy of a solar system for you to create your own power can range between 3 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour to make it. And if you're paying the retailers 25 to 45, and we're even seeing 50 cents a kilowatt hour now, it's a no-brainer to be able to put solar on if you can self-consume that energy throughout the day. But if you're using most of your energy at night, it makes it harder to justify having a solar system and getting the great financial benefits that everybody wants to see out of it. I don't necessarily have to treat every interaction that I have as closing a sale. I probably at least once a month say to somebody, from a financial perspective, if this is your main goal and objective, doesn't really stack up and make financial sense if you're using 5-10 kilowatt hours a day, which some people do. Not myself. I range from 20 to 30 on an average day and as much as 50 to 60 on peak days with nearly all electric home. And I don't have an EV yet. So
What's an EV?
electric vehicle.
Oh, okay. Yep, sorry. Sorry. Jump from big. Well, you've got a background in vehicles, so you kind of know what you're talking about with that. All right. So the situation where it's not going to suit the majority, some people, it's rare, but you do come across it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So now, how long do solar panels last? I've heard a wide range of statistics around this from people who probably don't know one way or the other. Do solar panels have a lifespan, essentially?
The vast majority of new installations now, or the products that are on the market, will come with a 25-year product and performance warranty. Now, that covers the product. There's lots of little hidden things in the T's and C's of all that. And a solar panel that's 20 years old and still in a warranty period, you're probably not going to be able to get a replacement to match into your system anyway. The most common point of failure is your inverter. So, and then what we've seen from that over the transition of years with the learnings from the electrical industry is that the standards have been consistently and regularly updating in the DC string inverter market. And typically you find that it's those changes that then make a system defunct or obsolete and needing replacement rather than it's being as simple as popping a new inverter on, because design criteria and inverter characteristics have changed a lot over time.
And because solar panels have been installed in homes for, quite a long time now, we're seeing, I imagine you're coming across homes with panels that were installed 10 or 15 years ago. And are those panels still performing at an optimum level to what they were, around about the time when they installed, or is there a deterioration over time?
Typically see a gradual degradation over time. They're still usable. What the other thing we've seen is we've gone from installing panels of 175 watts to now a common household installation will have a 440 watt panel. So for, almost similar footprints, you're getting a lot more energy that you can create and produce out of a system. It's very rare that we see somebody will have an older system that that's got 200, 250 watt panels that they'll want to get brought up to current standards, add a new inverter in. It's more financially viable in most instances for a complete system upgrade.
Right. Okay. And from a maintenance perspective, what do people need to think about when they've installed their, first of all, from an installation perspective, is there things that, they need to be mindful of around their roof? And secondly, once it's installed, are there things they need to do in order to maintain the panels at an optimum level?
The great thing with modern systems, the apps give you details and information about system operation without having to go out and look at the inverter on the wall or outside the house or in the garage. They have lights and indicators, so you can always, a lot of installations will be in garages. You drive in the garage, it's a quick glance across and you can see whether your lights are operating in the right formats. Maintenance, sometimes it's as much as visual. From my perspective, I know when I mow the lawns, I just sort of glance up at the roof and I'm looking underneath my solar panels to look for any loose cables or wiring that's come undone that might be rubbing on the roof. PowerCore run a program, and along with Solar Victoria, during peak period, they'll advertise or promote that the recommendations or it's advised to get a system checked every 2 years by a professional, just to make sure that you haven't got anything that's, say, for example, in the older systems that had the isolators on the roof, they might have water ingress or may not be fully sealed. And so then that's probably the most common point of failure aside from an inverter.
Okay. You mentioned PowerCore, and one of the things that has been discussed, and I think it's particularly prevalent with the AusNet changes. So there's they're talking about increasing capacity and so forth. Is there an issue with the amount of solar panels or solar power that's been pushed back into the system and the capacity for the network to manage that? Is that something that you've come across?
There's a lot of that noise in the industry, particularly at the moment. We had some new regulations yet again come in late last year around how systems need to be installed and control mechanisms. We see and hear a lot of noise in the industry, predominantly from other states, where you've got the solar tax and things like that happening.
Okay. Sorry. So let's just unpack that a little bit. So solar taxes in other states at this stage, not Victoria?
Not planned for Victoria. Not yet. No. We've seen the impact more around the reduction in the feed-in tariffs.
Okay.
So the oversupply of solar from solar systems, and the vast majority of systems installed out there don't have a control mechanism to reduce the way that they put or have the amount of energy that they feed in. So a lot of the new compliance that came in late last year is around more dynamic control and network control to help provide grid stability, particularly on those autumn, spring days, beautiful crystal clear days. All solar systems that are working well are operating at their maximum capacity. But the average home probably won't have heating or cooling on. So all of a sudden you've got this glut of electricity that can be fed into the grid, not being consumed, and it's got to go somewhere.
Okay. Even if the feed-in tariffs were, we'll talk a little bit about those in a couple of secs, but is solar power as just a home system still worth it, even if there is no feed-in tariffs at the end of the day?
Absolutely, for the right consumption pattern, and that's where it's either changing habits or having higher loads during the day that you can offset. The focus that we have now is, particularly from my perspective, is around what can I do for my self-consumption to eliminate paying that 25 to 50 cents a kilowatt hour. Mm-hmm. So if you can change your habits, or you can design a system that's really just going to predominantly offset your daytime consumption and get the maximum benefits out of that. We don't see that money flowing into people's positive accounts from the retailers, from gone are the days. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the government incentives and who kind of gets them and how they applied for, because I always get very confused with, the way these things are calculated and whether it applies to a property, whether it applies to a person. Like, what is the scenario?
So it typically relates to the property, but then there is part of the onus on the homeowner as for the criteria for the eligibility for the rebates that are around. So there's rebates, there's loans, typically referred to Solar Victoria rebate and loan, and then the federal government or STCs. STCs can be traded by the individual if they choose to do that, but in the vast majority of instances, the homeowner will choose to have all its deductions applied up front, and then it's up to the business or the solar installer or the retailer to then claim all those post the installation.
Can you just explain to me what an STC is?
It's a pro rata rebate or money that comes off the system based on the amount of energy that system's capable of producing over amount of time on a program that's earmarked for completion in 2030. So it's in a declining scale at the moment. So on the 1st of January every year, you might see, or particularly in November, December, the retailers will be promoting get in before the rebates reduce, and which they do. It is a genuine thing that they drop by 1 year or a 1 year multiplier, which way back when the STCs were quite significant, when it was, a 20-year program or rebate. We're now down to sort of the last remaining of the current scheduled thing for about 5 years.
And are the STCs different from the feed-in tariffs?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right. See what I mean? There's so many things.
It's a really complex if you don't know it, and it can be daunting, and that's probably one of the biggest things that we see with consumer take up is the dauntingness of it, and some of those things that happen in the industry over time, and those dodgy operators.
Phone calls you get at 7 o'clock at night.
Yeah, people get scared. And there's a lot to take in, and it can be very confusing. And it's trust and getting the right advice is a big thing.
Yeah. Okay. Now the government incentives at this stage, there's a you're saying that there is a sort of sunset clause on those for now. Has there been any noise about that continuing or being extended?
Not in particular, because it's still got a few years left. The feel and some of the podcast things that I listen to is, for example, in New South Wales, they're trialling a program at the moment which is similar to STCs, but it applies to a battery purchase. So if we think about the amount of solar and the penetration that we've had in Australia, and particularly in the incentives and all that that's given such a high uptake, the next evolution for that stability is batteries. So if I was a betting person, I think we'll see in the very near future more of a program focusing on batteries.
Let's think about batteries then. That's good. Great segue, because one of the things that I hear a lot is batteries are one of those things that will eventually come to a point where there's a tipping point where it makes sense for everybody to get a battery and so forth. But I don't know what are the things that are kind of creating that mindset, or what are the things that are the economics that are making that decision fall in the right way. Explain to us a little bit about that.
For the vast majority of people, it is based on a financial decision and an upfront cost. If we reflect back 10, 15 years ago, we were paying $15,000 or more for 5 kilowatt or less solar systems. Now you can buy battery and solar systems on the market from retailers for, it's a complete system for $15,000. It's all relative around what is the mindset. Am I ready for battery? Is it a want or a need is what we typically see. The vast majority of our purchases are based on wanting a battery, not necessarily needing a battery.
So why would you need a battery? What would be the reason that from a retailer's perspective, someone who's installing and going through this exercise on a day-to-day basis, when would you recommend that it's a good idea to go for a battery?
The most practical need that people have is for grid supply. So in a lot of areas, and Bunnyong is one of those, and surrounding areas, in rural areas as well as around the surrounds of here, brownouts, blackouts, weather events are things that sort of have people maybe needing a battery. From the other perspective is we just get a lot of people that just go, you know what, I'm sick of paying money to the retailers and I want to be independent as I can from the grid. And I've got that peace of mind that if there is a grid outage event, I've got power for as long as I've got energy left in the battery, of course. But I'm being as self-sufficient as I can within my means.
By having the battery, though, don't you give yourself the ability to just draw power from that instead of drawing it from the grid? Is that not the scenario? So if you've got the battery power, because obviously the majority of people living on a day-to-day basis, let's take the average family of 4, right? Their kids are at school during the day and parents predominantly at work. So the house is somewhat empty, and other than maybe, the occasional, let's call it winter time frame, where, their heater might kick in occasionally, or they might have it sort of set to come in at 4 o'clock, kick on at, maybe 3 o'clock just before the kids are starting to come home. If your majority of usage happens, outside of, daytime hours, you've got the ability to draw on that battery power for a significant period until that reserve is depleted. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, correct. So I've lived with battery for a bit over 2 years now. And some people may have noticed in the last year or two that there's also been changes in the tariff, the electricity tariff structures and timeframes. So when we saw all those big rises about 12, 18 months ago in electricity prices, a lot of the plans changed now that there's a peak between 3 p.m. and 9 p.m. So my living experience from that is that when I purchase battery, for the vast majority of the year, I don't have to pay for that peak electricity. My battery covers the vast majority of my consumption between 3 p.m. and 9 p.m.
How old are your kids?
I've got 2 kids, both still at primary school. So it's 2 dishwashers a day, 2-3 loads of washing a day,
So you're like a typical family, essentially. So when it comes to the bills, what sort of things can people, I mean, let's just keep this fairly general, but, what could most people expect to see the average power bill of, a couple of $100 to, $300 every month or so? What is that likely to reduce to with a system like you're talking about?
The industry reports around the averages and things like that sort of indicate that the average home will save around about $1,000 a year on battery with the battery installation.
Gotcha.
And solar can be that or more. So for a smaller consuming home, the savings perhaps aren't as great as what I see as a high consuming home, in that if I didn't have solar, my bills from the last calculations that I did would have been ranging around $5,000, if not $6,000 for the year. The last full year analysis I did for my place, I paid about $1,000 a year for all my electricity, and I could live with that, and I was happy with that. So I was seeing far greater savings. But we've changed our habits. We do a lot of things around the cycling and programming and on and off things. And I don't have a completely high-tech home. It's all pretty stock standard around habits, more so than fancy and expensive gadgetry, which there's a lot of out there. But, they're talking, $1,000 for each sort of system is about an average saving that Solar Victoria sees from the data that they get.
Okay. A $15,000 battery and solar panel system and so forth, that's your is that the cost to the consumer, or is that before the rebates?
That's typically an out-of-pocket expense.
Okay, gotcha. But there are much cheaper systems that people can go with, depending on how many kilowatts and so forth they want to put on their roof, I presume.
Yes. We typically see two purchase motives or things that people are looking for. One is brand, is typically for those that have got the expendable income. They'll be more orientated on a brand purchase than they'll be on a price point purchase. The vast majority of inquiry we get is based on price point, and it typically stems from the retailers, I'll call them, out there that you'll see on the TV and clickbait and all that sort of stuff, which will advertise cheap systems. Going back to one of my original comments, from our perspective, it's around getting the right battery system for your needs and then your budget.
Yeah. Okay. The big question everyone probably wants to know that doesn't currently have solar and is thinking about it, whether it's, for their current usage or they're thinking about potentially selling their home, is does it add value to the home? Now, do you know of any studies that have been done that demonstrate an increase in a property's value as a result of having solar panels on batteries and so forth connected to them?
Anecdotally, you'll see from the real estate industry and some industry around solar and batteries is that they will say that there is a percentage or they get a higher sale price point from the property. From my experience, I probably typically see a home that's got a battery and a solar system is somebody that's probably got a bit more money and can afford it. So therefore their homes are a bit nicer. And you're typically never going to see, this is my pragmatic hat coming on. You're not going to see two identical houses stacked next to each other, one with solar, one without, and then advertised on the market. What it does do, I think, though, is for potential purchasers, is that it's one less thing that they have to think about if you've already got it on your home, is they don't have to come in and then go through what is an arduous journey for a lot of people about finding a solar system, finding a battery system. And it's probably the brand or the products that you've got in there aren't probably going to motivate a buyer to purchase your house. It's going to be around your location and your property desirability.
So there was a study that was done by Australian National University going back to 2015 that suggested that the average increase in, or the average home that had a reasonable size system on their roof increased the property values by an average of 4%. Now, that was back in 2015, so we're talking 10 years ago, number one. But number two, what they tried to, and I haven't read this report intimately, like I'm not familiar with the full details. I was just capturing some of the footnotes. But what they said was the more kilowatts that the system had, the higher the improvement, I guess, in terms of the value of the property. And I guess it's percentages is difficult because it depends on the starting price of the property. If you've got a $10 million property, adding 4% to the value, it's like, oh, hello, like that makes for infinite sense. So I don't know that that's necessarily, I have difficulty kind of correlating all of those things together. But as I think intuitively, we think about the fact that, look, if you were going to spend, $10,000 on putting a $15,000 putting a system, you would think that would at least add that value to the property, potentially, and some, wouldn't you?
For anybody that's involved or that's if that's important to them as part of the decision-making purchase of the property, yes, it will. Yes.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I guess that's the market kind of dictates or works out, where that sort of stands and so forth. So, okay. Is there anything about solar systems that's risky? Like, is there anything that we need to be careful about?
Solar is electrical. And any electrical around.
So don't self-install. You're saying just don't do it yourself.
There was a podcast I was listening to the other day, and they were referring to that Tesla being available to buy out of Bunnings. It's going in and buying a hot water service out of Bunnings, and then you got to find an installer. I read quite a bit on and follow quite a few websites and different things, and in the industry, we see and hear a lot about people going out and purchasing products and items from wholesalers who will sell to the general public, and retailers that will have access to products and sell to the general public. And then they go on the hunt finding somebody who will then install that product. And typically they're looking at getting the product at the cheapest price point, and then they're going to look for the cheapest installer. But like a lot of things in life, people have brand associations. And brand familiarity or belief and support and knowing in the support of that product. So you'll typically find an electrician will have a product that he's got an alignment with and a familiarity with, and that's what he will back and support. So, there's a lot of good systems. A lot of the rubbish stuff has been whittled out of the market, and compliance has got rid of a lot of that stuff that was around 10, 15 years ago, and everybody was doing community group buying groups and importing shipping containers from overseas. That sort of dynamics shifted and moved out a lot. So back to the original point, I guess, if it's got electrical involved, and when we're talking a standard string inverter system, we're talking high voltage DC. Yeah. It's not sort of stuff that you really want to be playing with, and when you don't know what you're doing.
Okay. The off-grid idea. So there is a movement towards that as much as possible. There's a practicality issue there in terms of the cost time and the conversations had with various people around it, or the people that I know that have done it anyway. Is there any time when you've got a home currently connected to power and probably got gas as well and so forth? Is there any point in trying to get to a system where it can go completely off-grid at this point in time?
For Ballarat or people living in cooler climate areas?
Well, we're targeting the Ballarat area, so let's work on that for now.
And overcast environments, particularly in winter, it's very hard to set up a solar and a battery system.
Let's not get into our weather
to go off grid.
Yeah.
We typically probably see that more around new developments, and where somebody's wanting to do a lifestyle property or a property that's
like a rural lifestyle ranch
is far from the nearest connection point. And obviously with costs for that nowadays, it can be in the tens, if not more likely hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a connection. So then all of a sudden $100,000 or $150,000 off-grid setup is more of a financial viable prospect, as well as not having to be connected to the grid and pay for it,
Yeah.
becomes a bit more practical and a bit more cost effective if that's, it's a $100,000 system versus a $200,000 connection to the grid. I quite often refer to it is that my solar is my first point of call, my battery is my second, my grid is my backup.
Yep. Okay. Great stuff. Well, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the process to explore the possibilities of going solar? What would be the best form of contact?
We can keep it pretty simple with our web forms. So Ballarat Solar Group, there's a lot of Ballarat Solar something. So from our perspective, it's important to remember Ballarat Solar Group. We have the little yellow solar panels.
Is that .com.au?
.com.au.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So people can just search up Ballarat Solar Group and then go to the one with the website ballaratsolargroup.com.au.
Yes.
Cool. And we'll make sure we put some details into the show notes. So if anyone's interested, they can click on those links. But really appreciate you coming in today and giving us a run through and understanding the ins and outs. And I'm sure there's so much more to learn, but we've only got a limited amount of time. But it's been great to have you, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Stu.
No worries. Cheers. If you have a friend or family member that you feel might benefit from some of the information that you've just heard, then it would mean the world to us if you could share this episode with them personally. Oh, and one last thing before you go. We have some really interesting topics planned for the upcoming episodes. So if you have any comments, feedback, or real estate topics that you'd like covered, I would love to hear from you. So please reach out to us via email, which is info@regionalproperty.show, or leave us a note in the comments section. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button to be notified when new episodes are released. I'm Stu Bryan. Thanks for listening.